Today on CityCast Denver. Our guest today went off on Twitter earlier this week about climate change. He had a lot to say about our elected leaders and how they deal with the climate crisis, and I wanted to talk to him about it. Today is Thursday, August 12th, 2021. I'm Bree Davies, and this is CityCast Denver. Chase Woodruff, welcome to CityCast Denver.
Thanks for having me.
So, Chase, you cover climate issues for Colorado Newsline, and with the wildfire smoke and the ozone and the new UN climate report, it's been quite a week on your beat. How are you feeling about it all?
It's a little overwhelming. It's like everybody, I think everybody in Denver kind of had this experience over the weekend of really feeling like, viscerally like we are, this is what climate change feels like, and this is what it feels like in the back of our throats and our headaches and everything like that.
Yes, I would say that was part of my pre-conversation with my producer about this. This is one of the first times where I'm feeling this thing that we talk about all the time, which I understand is a really privileged place to come from too, because climate change has been impacting communities for decades on scales much larger than our scratchy throats,
Yeah, it can be invisible. I mean, it's kind of this, it's literally this invisible gas in the air that's heating up the planet on a long-term and global scale. And, it is slow and gradual until it's not.
Yeah, until it's like it's like eventually it's going to impact everyone, essentially. So a couple of days ago, you tweeted this thread of thoughts that really got me thinking about the issue in relationship to Colorado. And so I just wanted to quote one of those tweets now and kind of just go from there. So you said, if you're a Colorado resident, your local, state, and federal governments are pretty much aligned on a coherent vision of how to respond to climate change and its risks. They are making these choices for you. What did you mean by that?
Well, I think that a policy response to climate change, at pretty much every level of government, whether it's Denver city level or the state level or, now the federal government and the Biden administration, they're all pretty similar in terms of their kind of approach to dealing with climate change. I mean, one thing we're not talking about now is climate change real? I think a lot of people are on the same page. They understand that climate is a big threat and we need to act to respond to it. And what does that look like? And I think that, as I said in the thread, the policy responses from the local state governments here in Colorado and the federal government now all kind of take the same approach, which is that, yes, climate change is real. We need to respond to it, but none of them are, proposing big shifts, I think, in the way that we live now. The choice that's being made is to slowly bring our levels of greenhouse gas emissions down over the next several decades. And, we will decarbonize the electricity sector, which means, replacing coal and natural gas generation with wind and solar, and that will happen over the next several decades. And so the idea is that, kind of gradually over the next several decades, without really making anybody change a lot about the way they live their lives, we will bring these emissions down. And we should understand that choice isn't exactly, that there could be other choices that are made.
And you kind of bring up this point that I feel a lot of folks are feeling right now, which is, do those choices, okay, so those are the choices the government is making with larger legislation and sort of, unfortunately, passing the buck into the next generation. But in this immediate time, do the things that we do as individuals, do those changes matter? Does driving less matter? Does driving an electric car matter? Does mowing your lawn at night instead of in the middle of the day, is that going to really make an impact?
In the aggregate sense, I think those things can make an impact. I mean, I think everybody understands that one person choosing to mow their lawn at night isn't going to ultimately make that big of a difference in terms of air quality. The thing that I think sometimes gets lost when we focus too much on those personal individual choices is we're making those choices within the context of a system and a set of conditions that's being created by sort of larger structural decisions that are being made by policymakers and governments. And I can decide whether, for example, to take the bus to work in the morning instead of driving my car, but I didn't directly decide how often is the bus coming and how much are we funding the public transit agency that is running that bus, and do I live in a neighborhood that decades ago was built densely enough to support public transit in my neighborhood, and where am I going to work, and things like that. So I think what state officials sometimes say is that when you talk about different kinds of polluters, like there are only so many coal plants in Colorado and they're owned by utilities, and there are a small number of actors in that sector, and so it's you can kind of get more directly at pollution in that sector because you're only regulating, a small number of entities, whereas there are millions of cars driving on Colorado roads every day, and changing that behavior is a much different kind of regulatory and structural policy question.
So another tweet from this thread that you posted was how much carbon will be in the atmosphere when we finally stop emitting it. Again, it's the most important question of our lifetimes. And the people in charge in Denver, in Colorado, in the federal government have decided for you that it doesn't really matter. How can you tell that they've made that decision for us?
One of the largest sources of carbon emissions is electricity generation, right? Coal plants, natural gas plants. And in Colorado, we still get a lot of our electricity from coal and natural gas, and that's emitting carbon into the air. And what Xcel Energy, Colorado's largest utility and one of the kind of the big players in this discussion, has said is they want to get to zero carbon emissions, and they want to do it. And they're planning to do it without raising utility rates and what you pay in your electric bill every month faster than the rate of inflation over the next several decades. They're targeting 2050. That's a choice. I mean, we have decided that we don't want our electricity bills to go up very much to solve this, and there are other choices that could be made, and so. If you've decided that you aren't going to cause a lot of near-term costs and disruptions, which I think more or less we have decided, you are deciding that you're going to pay those costs later. And that's what the science says. If you want to talk about we need to get to zero carbon emissions, well, theoretically, at one end of the scale, you could pass laws worldwide saying no more. We're going to shutter all the coal plants tomorrow, and we're not going to drive cars anymore. Obviously, you wouldn't do that because that would cause all kinds of suffering and mayhem, and you'd have worldwide blackouts. And so no one's talking about that. What is at the opposite end of the spectrum is, well, let's just do what's convenient today and what we can manage today.
Like maybe the cost would be new infrastructure for alternative sources of that energy instead, and we're not willing to pay now.
No, I don't. I don't think that there's been any demonstrated appetite at any level of government to say, yeah, we would want to get to zero carbon emissions faster with significantly higher electricity bills. The kind of most of what you see, the decisions being made are how do we get there while still keeping electricity affordable today. Another thing is in terms of what are the costs we are taking on today versus later is, the largest source of carbon emissions is the transportation sector, cars and trucks being a big part of that. And that's another area where we have decided we don't want really to change a lot about the way we all get around right now. We just passed a $5 billion transportation funding bill in Colorado that pretty much keeps kind of the same formulas in place in terms of, well, we're going to spend a lot of money on highways, and we're going to spend a significant amount on kind of transitioning to electric cars, and that will take several decades. And we're not saying we want to make big changes tomorrow to the way we all get around, even though, again, that's a choice that we're making. And that I'm not sure what else to say.
Yeah,
that's a choice we're making.
I know. I was trying to think about when we voted on fast tracks, just like, I've lived in the city my whole life, and we continue to just build highways. Like, we don't make it any easier to ride the bus. We make it harder to ride the bus. So those are big choices we're making. I guess, is there anything that makes you hopeful, or anything that could give us some hope in the future of this issue?
Sometimes. I think really in the last few years, you've seen a sea change in kind of the way everyday people talk about this. It's an open question whether that has kind of filtered up to the level of policymaking. I think to a certain extent it has, and especially the federal government. You see under the Biden administration a much different approach to climate change than we had under the Trump administration, to put it mildly. And there's going to be in all likelihood, some big climate things happening at the federal government level. And, obviously the federal government has more power to change these things than the local or state government does. So, there's a lot more, I think, awareness, and we are getting to the point where, as we saw this weekend, people are really viscerally experiencing the impacts of this. And I think that awareness and that sort of popular will to confront these issues has really come a long way, I think. That's what I tell myself.
Yeah, I agree. I know it sounds cliched, but I do have a lot of faith in the next generation's work on climate change versus, say, my age group. Not saying that we didn't do anything, but there is that hope for the future.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Chase Woodruff, thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
And here's what else is going on in Denver today. After being closed for almost 2 weeks because of flash flood triggered mudslides, Governor Polis says the I-70 corridor through Glenwood Canyon will reopen this Saturday. Or at least it will partially reopen. According to CPR, lanes will be open in both directions, with a few sections of the highway still closed off because of ongoing issues, like a massive hole the governor is calling the pothole from hell. It seems some Coloradans may have already snagged an unofficial booster shot of the COVID-19 vaccine. According to the Colorado Sun, the CDC has not officially determined if a third dose will make the vaccine more effective, but the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment says the state's immunization registry shows more than 6,000 people have received a booster dose. The CDC is still debating whether booster vaccines should be authorized for immunocompromised people. That's all for today here on CityCast Denver. If you enjoyed the show, why not take a minute to tell a friend about us, rate the show wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe to our morning newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye-bye! Dun dun dun! Potholes, the common problem in Colorado.